Hi,
Hello,
I'm Julian.
and I am Tom.
We are Team Binge, in case you've forgotten. We are here to talk about Masters of the Air, episodes 8 and 9. So the penultimate episode and the
Couple extra N's
finale.
and T's. Appreciate it.
I'm here for it. So, what we are going to do, it's been a little while, we're going to summarize and then give our thoughts on this show. And boy, Tom, do I have thoughts. And I know you were surprised at the outcome of World War II in general.
Correct.
Hopefully, you were pleasantly surprised. If not, this podcast is going to turn into something else. So, we join our friends and all the movie stars are in a POW camp and everyone else is doing drugs. That's essentially where we're at for part 8. So we split it up into the different storylines. We'll talk through it, and we appreciate. Once again, we're going to make some jokes here and we're going to have some criticisms. I want to say from the top, Tom, that we think these stories are important and we love, the work that these guys do. And there are a lot of pluses out of this show. And not to show my hand, but man, I'm going to grill this show so hard by the time we get to the end of it. No. Let's dive into part 8, which is mainly Kraz preparing for D-Day. And then we get the classic Tuskegee Airmen storyline, which did not feel at all shoehorned or strange to just be put in 15 minutes of an episode.
Agreed.
But the one thing that I find that I have appreciated about this show is the acting. There's I don't know if you remember watching Band of Brothers and seeing some of those actors for the first time. Like a lot of them we were exposed to, like Damian Lewis. That was the first time I had come across him. And other than Richard Nixon, not Richard Nixon, Nix from Band of Brothers, from Office Space, I didn't really see him in a bunch of stuff. And David Schwimmer, he never did anything, right? So,
Nope,
I don't know.
never.
Watching this show, obviously there's 2 big movie stars in it, but there's also guys that, the guy that plays Kraz, he's great.
Anthony Boyle. Yeah, he's fantastic.
And then I think he's Irish, right? And he does a great job playing Harry Crosby, whose book I read and finished. I'm very proud of
nice.
that. I'm a literary man. And I'd like to read you a couple of chapters from that book now. So everyone settle in. And then the guy that plays Rosie Rosenthal, both those actors, I just thought, doing an outstanding job. As well as underappreciated, and I've got some issues with the storyline, but the woman that plays Sandra does an outstanding job for someone who's given very little. But let's dive into Kraz's storyline from episode 8. This is him prepping for D-Day, and drugs are a hell of a drug, essentially.
What was he doing here? Was it pills? Was it coffee?
Some sort of methamphetamine, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Some sort of uppers, and then, coffee, and then, this is the 1940s, so he was probably snorting, Hershey chocolate bars or something. I don't know.
So tell me more about this, right? So you read the book. So from what my understanding is, he was doing mapping out 100 plus missions. Ultimately, was had 72 hours without sleep because he was just doing all this stuff to prepare for it, and actually slept through D-Day. From my understanding, that is true. Is that what you read in the book?
Yeah. So essentially, they knew the invasion was coming, but you don't know exactly where the invasion is going to happen. And then, it's happening in Normandy. So then these guys had to put all of these missions together where literally these bombers would fly out, hit their, run, come back, reload on the field, and go back out. And it was just constant operations in order to support the ground invasion. And so it sounds like 3 days prior, he's told, hey, where you're going and what missions you have to plan. And so he has to have all those mission briefings, before we see in the show where they sit in those briefing tents and they get hey, here's your, distance and direction that you're going to fly for this whole mission. Well, he had to do all of those so that when those guys came back from a bombing run, they were simply handed the paperwork and then like, their mission data, and then they could go off again. So yeah, him is I mean, I don't know that it's the smartest thing to do to have the guy that's not been sleeping plan all of the like distance and directions. I'm sure a navigator or two up in the air at like mission 7 was like, what did Kraz do? It's got me flying in a circle. Yeah, what's with all these Z's? He's like, is this drool? What is? It's just like a face print and drool on the map. But yeah, and this is true to his book. Once again, Harry Crosby came back and wrote a book called A Wing and a Prayer, which I found very fascinating. Once again, if you take, I believe it's Don Miller's Master of the Air book, that's like big picture scope of the 100th. Harry Crosby is like his specific role and kind of the personalities. And I'm surprised they don't give his book more credit in this show, because there are a lot of stories that are pulled from it. And in Masters of the Air, that book, there are stories that are pulled directly from Harry Crosby's memoirs. So it's interesting. And one storyline that is in there, she's named something different, is the Sandra storyline. And I understand like what they're trying to do here, but it felt like there's so many stories in Masters of the Air as a book that it felt really weird that they took the Sandra storyline and like expanded it out. And so we see her in this episode, like, because he's kind of like trying to get a hold of her, and we're trying to figure out, his assumption is that she's some sort of spy. So we see her in like occupied, she's running into Nazis on a train because she's doing some sort of subterfuge, some sort of spy mission. Well, Harry never knew what she did. These were just assumptions. So this show is purely making up like these stories. I don't know. I felt like in a show that has so many characters and so many different stories, you could tell why. And I understand like maybe the female perspective is like underrepresented in these, but it didn't feel like this was the right one. I don't know. I don't know. Thoughts, Tom?
Yeah.
Did you?
No, I tend to agree. Like, I like the idea of being able to get some, like, spycraft kind of stuff going on. But, I mean, all they did was show her entering the occupied territory, meeting up, I guess, at some sort of, like, British underground base thing of operations, and then just kind of cuts away. We don't get anything more from it. I think it would have been more impactful if, like, she was obviously an incredible character and played really well off of Crosby when they were kind of both needing, I think, each other. But going back, I'm with you. I don't think it was necessary. It didn't push the main story forward.
No, and it's also a little bit strange that like they yada-yada'd the two guys that went down and were like, and their guides were women taking them through,
I would love more of that.
Like that would have been an interesting story, but we just get like, oh, and they were back and they couldn't fly anymore because they knew too much. And so, I don't know. It was, I think there's been a couple of shows where we're in like the penultimate episode and we're like, there's not so much to wrap up, but it's almost like no one gave these guys a direction of like, hey, here's where we're going. The war's eventually going to end. Here's the stories we're trying to tell. And so it just, I don't know. This episode felt very like scattered, I guess.
Well, and I was going to say this to the end, but I'll kind of bring it up now. I feel like my problem with this show and why it's not, and again, we say we don't want to compare it to Band of Brothers, but you have to. It jumps around so heavily in time ranges here, right? Like where they're in prison and then 6 months later, like all in the same episode. What I loved about Band of Brothers is the fact that every episode is like a story in and of itself. It doesn't jump like drastically in time. It follows a character, it follows a perspective, and it like humanizes the war. And there's plenty of that going on here, but I think when they jump around between these characters and storylines, it just is nowhere near as impactful as really focusing on certain individuals.
Sure. I do also think just for like, I don't know, dramatic effect, they're doing some things where like we are witnessing a stage that couldn't be more dramatic. So like, let's go into the prison camp. So we have these like conversations going with Buck and Bucky, and I don't remember the commanding officer of the POWs that they're constantly talking to. But they're like, oh, we need to be prepared to like fight. They're going to either like force us by gun, but we need to be ready. And they've got that like weird stump puller exercise machine. And
Stump
he's
fest.
like, Stump Fest. Yes. Thank you.
It's a Bluey reference for the Masters of Aircraft.
Oh, man. Yeah. Bluey's a great show. We should talk about that show. Anyways, sorry, Barrett. We're teasing it again. I think it's Egan. He's like, that's how we get like ready. That's how we get. And you're almost expecting like a Rocky like exercise montage after he says that. And it was it's just very weird because then all of that goes away when we roll into like 9. It's like, hey, we're moving, like they're moving us from the POW camp. It's like, are we fighting? No, we're not fighting. Okay, we're just grabbing. And I understand that that's the smart play and the historic play. Like, why fight a defeated enemy? Like, just kind of go. You're just trying to survive at a certain point. But it was really weird, like, because they also have these two fight, right? This is the one where they're wrestling on the ground because Egan's kind of losing his cool, and Cleven's just trying to like be like, hey man, just like settle down. Like we're working here. I don't know. Yeah, this was conflict for just show reasons, not. I don't know. Didn't feel.
No, I agree with you. Genuine. I mean, they've tried to keep making these characters like be polar opposites, and how Bucky is becoming restless and like feels like he needs to do something, where Buck is more like level headed and said, like you mentioned, like we can wait this out and we'll be okay. But I struggle with so much of this sequence because I really didn't get a sense for how long they were there in this camp. I mean, if they're there for years, then I can, I guess, maybe understand Bucky's restlessness. But because they jumped around so quickly, it was a little bit challenging. It didn't really give us a whole lot of timestamps. I think a handful of narrations actually say like what the date is, but
you wanted a 24 style, the TV show 24 style countdown. You wanted a clock throughout the whole. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm with you. Also, you wanted the Allstate guy to play the president. He was going to play FDR in this as well. I can't remember that actor's name. He's great in so many things. Boo on me. The Unit. He's great in The Unit. Anyways, just to give you some historical perspective, Tom, and if I've got these numbers right, I will not be correcting them, much like I did the speed in the last episode. I believe Egan was a POW for 19 months, and that Cleven he escaped like a month early, so he was a POW for 18 months. I believe that's the timeline there.
I like what they did though, like within the prison, how they kind of kept like order. Where to your point, like they had like the captain that they still like looked to and kind of led the men. But it's easy for the men to potentially, because they're malnutritioned and like not working out or anything, to become like less prepared for what they inevitably know is kind of coming, whether it's the march or having to defend themselves. So I kind of liked how they gave us a little bit of that and how they kind of prepared for it in the prison.
Sure. Yeah, there are articles that govern when you become a POW, how you're supposed to act and what you're supposed to do. So there are rules that these guys. Well, but
the whole problem was, did you say there are rules like for if you are a prisoner, these are the things you should do?
Yes, on your side. Like it just doesn't turn into anarchy. There's still going to be a commanding officer, name, rank, serial number, those types of things. That's all. Those would have all been taught to these guys. Certainly airmen who, had the greatest chance of ending up being prisoners. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, how many stumps were in this prison? I'll give you over under, Tom. 4,000. Oh. How many stumps were at this prison? And have you ever seen a stump puller like that? I, in my life, have never seen a stump puller like that.
Yeah. They're innovators, man. And I would argue maybe it didn't work very well when they made it, which is why you probably don't see it around these parts. But yeah, good on them.
Do you think when one guy walked into the building, the other guy was like, bro, look at those arms. You've been hitting that stump puller, huh? And the guy's like, yeah, got in my reps today. He's like, I'm going to make a protein shake. Maybe, I don't know. That's as far as I go with maybe do some sort of jazzercise on the DVD. Would that be the next thing they would say? I don't know. P90X, that's what it is. And then they're going to use the Ronco rotisserie grill. All right, let's move on. I was up Sunday just watching infomercials. So, okay. I want to go on record. I feel like so we're taking a book called Masters of the Air, which is focused on the Bloody 100. So the Tuskegee Airmen, that unit was not a part of that, and so in that book, I think it's been documented. Like there's only a page mentioned to them, and that's because like they weren't part of that unit. It wasn't their story,
Yeah.
and so I I think that is a very well. I mean, it's a tragic story in the sense that we weren't integrated as a military at the time, but like the fact that what those guys overcame, and then their service record, and like they're flying P-51s, which are super awesome, and they do a great job at it, and all of those things. It just felt like it was disingenuous to put this into this episode for 15 minutes, and I guess. I understand, and I thought like I either wanted more, or is it bad to say I wanted like a lot more, or I wanted just none? Like just stick to, because we're already in a show that we've struggled to like know who people are, and like remember characters. All of a sudden it's like, hey, here's a new group on the penultimate episode. Like
Yeah.
keep track and good luck. Like I don't know. This just felt
Yeah, I
shoehorned.
feel like
I wanted more, but
I agree. Yeah, I mean, like, I think there's been movies, there's been series and stuff made about these guys, and I think you need more time to be able to bake out these characters. I almost feel like just the name of the show, calling it Masters of the Air, like they felt they needed to touch on like all the aspects of aerial battles as opposed to just focusing on the Bloody 100th. Again, still very interesting stuff, like where you see some of these guys like fighting for a country that ultimately wasn't fighting back for them, still being treated like this overseas. You see like the way the Germans almost kind of try to play against some of these guys and say like, hey, your country doesn't like you. If you've lived here in Germany, we would treat you better. It was very fascinating stuff, but I couldn't agree more. All this stuff was just so rushed and so quick. You didn't have time to really dig into the horrific conditions and stuff that these guys, not conditions, I guess, but
things they had to
still having
overcome
deal with
in order to get where they were. And like, I don't know, some shows like they're treating the audience a little bit like I don't know. I don't know. It felt shoehorned, and it felt like they were like, here's a real quick history lesson that we're literally making like as easy to comprehend as possible. And like I don't know. I just didn't, I felt like that. I mean, the Tuskegee Airmen could be a mini series on its own. And I think it would be a fascinating one. Once again, I think I talked about, there's an HBO, I believe it was an HBO movie called The Tuskegee Airmen. The portion I did like of this episode that talked on the Tuskegee Airmen was where they're like, hey, you're going on a suicide mission. And they have the guy do all the math, and it's like the Reddit board that's like they did the math, which I find very funny. And the guy's like, well, you're going to be given some papers so you can blend in with the populace. And that joke, like the way it hit and the way they're all just rolling their eyes, that I thought was pretty funny. And so, but we're introduced to, I believe it was Macon and Jefferson are the two Tuskegee Airmen that we kind of stick with. And they have them join the Buckies in POW camp, which, once again, I don't think is historically accurate. I think they may have crossed paths. They all ended up in a Stalag somewhere. But like there's this thing where like the Buckies are like integrating them into their like escape plan and stuff. And once again, it was just like, hey, let's force this into a show that doesn't need it. So
yeah, it became a little too cute. Yeah, I'm with you.
So that ended that episode and led us into part 9.
Now, part 9 was a movie, right? This thing was an hour and a half long, which I was not against. I thought this was a very strong conclusion, but it was long.
Yeah, I mean, these guys suffered through, 4 years of war, Tom. But yeah, it's probably a struggle to make it through an hour and 20 minutes. That's such a terrible turn on you. I'm the guy that's constantly complaining about the length of things. Listen, Tom, I don't know if you know, but my grandfather was on D-Day, and he would be ashamed with you right now. No. You were right. It's a long episode, which we love. if TV people are listening to us, we love a tight 45 minutes. You know, it's listen, 22 without commercials, Modern Family, Seinfeld, you know, Arrested Development,
Saved by the Bell.
Yeah, Saved by the Bell. Not a fan.
Don't miss out on the last few weeks of football action with Prize Picks, the best place to win cash while watching the playoffs. The app is simple. Pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Download the Prize Picks Daily Fantasy Sports app today and use code FIELD and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code FIELD on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks. Run your game. Must be present in certain states. Visit prizepicks.com for restrictions and details.
Speaking of things I'm not a fan of, the Russians. No, part 9.
The Russians are the best, man.
Tom?
I didn't realize how great they were.
Tom? Actually, we haven't put a timestamp on this episode, so I mean, they could be good again. Who knows? But this episode I thought was interesting, and so we get a big portion of this is Rosie and his crew, and we've seen Rosie now go from like the 3-mission guy that got sent to Flak Happy Camp to now he's like on his second tour. He's the lead bomber. He's taking care of guys. Like I wanted so more from the Rosie character in terms of, I understand that the guys that play Egan and Bucky are the movie stars right now, Austin Butler and Callum, but like, give me more Rosie Rosenthal. I thought his character was fascinating, and I feel like they dedicated really one episode to him, and then that one weird scene where like, Rosie 25, we did it, and they like high five, and then one guy's holding up like a Mentos thing and looks straight into the camera, and he's like, the fresh maker. That was such a weird, I'll never get over how daunting that scene
stuck with
was.
you.
Yeah, they played it in a recap, and I was like, why would you play that in a recap? Like, that was the worst shot scene of this whole. Anyways, so we've got.
But I'm 100% with you though. Like when they first introduced Rosie, because it was at a point in the show where they were just throwing characters at us, and you had no idea who was kind of going to be around. So it's hard to kind of invest in somebody. But I would have loved to be able to follow Rosie's all the way through, or get more from him, because I feel like the way they shot him, even though I do want more, I thought was just absolutely brilliant. Like his heroism, like thinking about others and doing like more, way above and beyond, like even after the 25 missions that he wanted to sign back up. Like, I mean, you talk about the heroes of the war that don't get talked about probably enough. Like, this is the epitome of it.
Right. And so in this show, in this episode, we see him get shot down. He's the lead. They are flying over Germany, I believe. He's shot down, but in real life, Rosie was shot down twice. So by the time we get to this one, he had already been shot down once, returned. And so like his reputation of being indestructible was like prevalent. Like he was a leader of this unit. And so this.
How did that happen though? So do you know more about the circumstances of that? Because didn't they make a bit about like if you get shot down, or did he not get shot down over enemy territory and then?
My understanding is maybe that first time he didn't have to go through like those resistance channels, so they just assume, hey, you know, he's okay to fly again. He doesn't know enough about those that he would give them up. But I had as I was writing that in the outline, I had the same thought. But I just know that he was shot down twice. Wow. And this one was like, I don't know. There are certain harrowing scenes in this where the guys are trying to get out of the plane. This one, and then the one where Babyface doesn't make it, I thought were just exceptionally well done in terms of how tense they are. And I know listen, if this was a Michael Bay film, they would have flown that B-17 in the air. They would have circled it with a camera, flown an American flag, and then blown it up for real. But with this show, since they have to use CGI, I feel like some of these they really got right in terms of just how harrowing it was. And once again, there are times in this show where you're like putting yourself in that guy. Like, at what point are you like, all right, guys, we got to bail out? Like,
Right.
unfortunately, we know we're towards the end of the war. Things are bad, but we've got to bail out, and you've got to make that call. I just can't even imagine. So,
Well, and he stayed in that extra amount of time to try to keep the plane level so the guys can actually get out. He's trying to hold on as long as he possibly can so they're not in enemy territory as the battles and stuff are kind of literally going on the ground below them. Just wild. And that last shot of him like pushing and pulling against the like nose diving plane to try to get out was just incredible. Absolutely incredible.
I agree. And he ends up in the arms of your best friends, apparently, considering what you were saying earlier.
Who knew they were so lovely?
I don't know.
Could have fooled me.
And the way that's shot is also interesting. He's in that crater, and you can just tell like they're shooting everyone indiscriminately. And guess what? He's not dressed as a Russian, so he's probably going to get shot too. I thought this was all very interesting. I don't remember what he shouted. Something like American and Coca-Cola, Roosevelt, Churchill.
Babe Ruth.
I don't know. That was great.
The Yankees.
And I appreciate what they do with this in terms of rather than the next scene just being him back at like base, they like kind of have his journey, and he ends up like rolling with the Russians as they go through. I don't know if they go through Nuremberg or if Nuremberg's where the POWs eventually get marched, but he does wander through a concentration camp, and it's just in Band of Brothers they have the Why We Fight episode, which I think is 9, which is when they discover the concentration camps. I think this show kind of took the same formula, and it was like, hey, if you don't remember why we fought this and how bad it was and the atrocities that happened, I thought this was an interesting portrayal. And obviously, every time you see something like this, it's just absolutely heartbreaking.
And I think, the actor just did a phenomenal job of like walking into this scene and seeing the horror in front of him. Like it really kind of brings you in and just kind of shows like how brutal this was. And we saw more like later in the episode when they're like at the prison and they are just indiscriminately shooting at like POWs. Like these were just terrible, terrible circumstances. And these guys, and I think we get a scene later on where Rosie and Crosby are kind of like having that conversation about like the war and its effects on people, which I thought was kind of nice to kind of slow the characters down and have them have that conversation.
Sure. And they do have the one scene where he's talking to, as he's waiting for his plane out, where Rosie's waiting for his plane out, he's like talking to the guy that had to bury his family. And it was just like absolutely brutal. But
I think he has a line at the end where he said like, not even the earth that covers our bones will remember us. And I feel like that's such a powerful line, but like we think about like the importance of this series, like he has in that moment that nobody's going to remember them for like the sacrifices and everything that they went through. But this is the perfect example of like a show like this needs to exist. It needs to be out there. People need to ensure we never forget the heroism that these guys faced and things that they did and fought for our country.
Yeah, no, that is a very good. I did not think of that at the time, but that is a very good point. And why that as soon as the series comes out on Laserdisc, I will be buying it to add to my Laserdisc collection, right next to my tin of Laserdiscs for The Pacific and Band of Brothers, so that when my child turns 4 years old, I can make him watch all of them on repeat. All right, let's go to the POW camp. We have a series of like they are moving these guys from camp to camp, I guess, as the like front lines are collapsing in. I think Hitler's ultimate goal was to keep as many POWs as possible as like a bargaining chip, if I'm remembering that right. And so that's why they didn't just like leave these guys and the soldiers abandon them. There's a really interesting moment where Solomon, who they like have noted as like the Jewish airman, helps a German soldier who's struggling, and I thought that was an interesting moment from a show that it's like, hey, like from a humanities perspective, it's still like a person being kind to another person, despite the fact that that person belongs to an organization that is absolutely like irredeemable and terrible. So I thought that was interesting, but just watching these guys walk through CGI snow. Once again, if it was Michael Bay, he would have been just shooting snowballs at these guys' faces, but it's fine. That's me and Michael Bay's problem. But as these guys were walking, I couldn't help but think like how terrible like being cold is, and just how like I don't know, it's just the worst to be cold and to be tired. And it really reminded me of that time where my hot tub dropped to like 98 degrees, and
goodness.
It just what when I visit Grandpappy later on today, I'm going to tell him this story. He'll probably
so you had a hot tub. You had a hot tub when you went to that 98 degrees concert. It's wild, man. I didn't know they had those. I didn't know you could afford those seats. Good for you.
If I knew any other boy band, I would make some sort of reference. If I was quicker on the draw, I'd say something about BTS or...
Yeah, these boys became men.
Wasn't there? That's a good one, Tom. That was very good.
Boys, two men, I guess.
On the Two Men and a Bape, no. And on the Backstreets Boys, they became... Right?
Well, the Germans weren't very in sync toward the end.
Oh, look at you. This is terrible. Man, I can't. The greatest generation is rolling in their grave right now. But...
to your point about like the miserable and cold, like they get some respite at one point where they go to like a brick factory or whatever, and you see just all these guys like huddle around this fire and do their best to kind of share and then just like take each other's body warmth. It's wild conditions, and the fact that these guys survived it is incredible.
Right, and they're also being shot at by their own planes. I do love the idea of the pilots being like, that's a P-51. I know that sound anywhere. We're about to get shot. Everyone run for it. Like, yeah. So, and then we have the discussion of Egan, Clevin, and some of these other guys that... Honestly, we should know their names by this point in the series, but we don't. Like, I think one of them we meet in this episode for the first time. He's like, oh, I knew this guy from, like, flight school. And you're like, show, stop doing this. Like, this is the finale. Don't make me... And then they kill that guy later. And you're like,
that's all they did.
Okay, got it.
They tried to give him more of a backstory with our main character. So, like, it hits a little bit harder, which I thought was kind of silly. But I'd also argue, like... The way they ultimately decide to make a run for it here, they could have used a better distraction. They all just like, all right, I'm going to go. And then they turn their back and then just start slowly jogging to the other direction. I'd have had somebody like punch somebody on the other end of the line. I don't know.
You would have had 5 gentlemen do some sort of in-sync dance and song number on a stage that gets everyone bopping and a moving. And then those guys would run and jump over that wall. Yeah,
I put them in outfits. I put them in like a cop costume, construction worker, Native American.
This is a different. Okay, this is a different band. And then give the crowd kind of like easy hand motions to do in unison, so everyone feels like they're part of it. I gotcha. Yeah. Although the Germans, they're pretty good with those hand motions.
Goodness.
Yeah. So the The escape does not go well for Egan. I thought this was interesting, but he's saved by
the
his
one guy
CO.
that wants to escape the most, right?
I did, yeah, exactly. And then what I thought was also sad is the CO's like, Egan, what was that about? And he's like, oh, Clevin and those other guys all ran. Like, your other higher level officers that we didn't tell you, sir. They just decided to bounce. And I'm sure that commanding officer was like, oh, great. Thanks for sticking around, Egan. I'm glad I saved your tail. But, yeah. So historically, when they moved these guys the first time, that's actually when Clevin, during the confusion, he left. So surprise, surprise, it didn't happen exactly this way. But I did think it was interesting that these two that are so close did like separate. Right. And I'm sure that was a real heart-wrenching blow to Egan, who had to stick it out for another month or two. This leads to just a terrible scene that I did not enjoy in the least. We have one gentleman just trying to go to the bathroom, and he gets casually bayoneted in the back by some German soldiers that look like kids. And this was terrible. And as you mentioned, this was the guy that was introduced to us this episode, so that when he gets stabbed, we care a little bit. Although I would be honest, even if it was a random guy I didn't know, I would still feel for this gentleman because he gets bayoneted
100%.
twice while trying to
it's-
relieve himself.
And we find out, like, I mean, these are essentially, like you said, they're kids. Like, they don't know what they're doing. They don't realize the war is over. Like, we get shots later on of, like, some of the German soldiers, like, marching back and how, like, dejected they are. They understand, like, the war is over and they're just trying to survive it themselves. But, I mean, yeah, just an absolutely heart-wrenching sequence.
Yeah. Yep. And then Taylor Swift plays that song about a white horse.
Yeah, this whenever little white horse comes, I'm sure it's just like, the symbolism of the white horse and leading them to freedom. I don't know, but I mean, why do you not take this horse, right?
Oh, exactly. And I would.
You could fit 3 people on that horse.
No. I would abandon the other ones. I'd be like, good luck. Hiya! Hi-yo, Silver. And they're like, we don't get that reference. That show doesn't come out until after this war. And he's like, I don't care. I'm
You know the Air
Lone
Force's motto.
Ranger.
No horse left behind.
No horse left behind. It would have been funny if they cut to the scene and they're like eating that horse, and the one guy turns to the other and he's like, hey, we got to walk a really far distance. And he's like, yeah, here, you want some more leg? And the guy's like, we could have ridden this horse. And then they both just stare at each other.
This is so much better than that cat.
Yep. Oh, no. The cat. We're going to get letters. All right. I found this scene, once again, I don't know how historically accurate this is, but we've got a P-51 attacking an Allied POW camp, and they make it seem like he's trying to shoot the machine gunner in the tower, but boy, bullets don't just stop at their target. They continue on, and I would argue the 50 cals or the 30 cals coming out of that P-51 probably did a little bit of damage to the Allied PODs. There goes the boom. Anyways, those POWs, I don't know. And then all of a sudden we've got, them attacking the camp. And once again, I feel like there was maybe a little bit more peaceful handover of these camps than guys coming in just blazing away. Once again, bullets travel until they either hit something or they go a really long ways. I don't know.
Yeah, it seemed goofy. And, like, obviously the guys are all super excited because they see these kind of planes coming in to kind of rescue them. And, like, they're taking it like no big deal. Like, oh, yeah, let's just jump to the side and we'll jump to safety. But it did seem a little silly when you have, like, artillery or what do they have? They got tanks and stuff, like, coming in right behind them. So it didn't seem
a lot of
necessary at all.
explosions. And I do want to point out, once again, one of the Tuskegee guys is like, that's a P-51. And it's like, this guy's whole job is super hearing P-51s. And like in the middle of the night, he's just like in your bunk and he goes, that's a P-51. And you're
Wait,
like,
nope, wait, that's a P-50.
it's a P-50. We're going to get letters. There's no such thing as a P-50. Maybe there is. I don't know. Anyways, I found this. And this all leads to the raising of the American flag.
Yeah, I thought this was cool. Like, I didn't really realize what Buck was trying to do. I thought he was trying to, like, rally the troops, but essentially he is just running around camp trying to find an American flag because he knows what's happening. And then ultimately kind of puts it up. Everybody cheers. It seemed like a bit corny, but I thought it was incredibly powerful, and especially giving Egan that moment of putting that flag up there, kind of putting his head to the flagpole and just kind of like soaking it all in. It was pretty cool.
I agree. It was a very Hollywood moment, and I did stand up, salute, and sing the national anthem, and then march around. But I had trouble accepting it as a reality. And a show like this, where there's probably so many like true stories and dramatic stories that, I don't know, it felt. And once again, I was just like, man, we put a lot of bullets into that POW camp, which I don't know, like, these guys are rolling up on like chain link fences and a bunch of dudes crowded around. It's not like it's a bunch of Germans. They're like, oh, there's a German unit. They're all unarmed. They're mulling about. They look like they haven't eaten in months. Let's go shoot them. And they're like, roger that, sir. I don't know. Maybe it happened. I don't know. But yeah, I wanted, but it's tough to like give Egan. Once again, they made Egan one of the stars, and so it's like, how do we give him like the climax that he in his moment, and that's what they chose. So I don't know. I don't write for TV. I just criticize it all the time. So they say if you can't do it, criticize it. That's, I believe the saying. So that's what my mom always said to me about compliments. All right, back at the base. This was awesome. Crosby smushes a guy's face into his scrambled eggs, and I thought this was so great. Did you understand what was happening in this moment? My spouse had some questions. Okay,
not at all.
So
I realized there was some sort of supply issue. Couldn't tell you what happened because it happened so quick, but just seeing Crosby like lay his foot down was great.
Right. So Crosby in the book, like he's talking about like the person he's become. And part of him like doesn't like who he's become. But in this situation, what ended up happening is these planes are 5 minutes from going on a mission. A navigator comes to him and says, hey, we can't get parachutes because supply locked up the like supply room. And so Crosby is infuriated by this because it's like these guys are not going to go on missions without parachutes because they would have been issued a parachute for every mission. They would have turned it in afterwards. And so he goes and breaks in, gives them parachutes, and then the guy he assaults is the supply officer, and his point to him is, hey, you wait, like you keep it open until 30 minutes after these guys are wheels up. And the idea being these guys were so eager to get to breakfast that they were like, we're locking it up, no one cares, let's go get scrambled eggs. And then Crosby makes him eat those scrambled eggs with his cheek. And so this was the story from his book. I thought it was great, and I do think... like, unfortunately, there are people, and I mean, I don't know. I can't speak to what kind of person I would maybe be. That supply officer who's just like, man, I'm really hungry for breakfast. Hope everyone's got their parachute. I'm locking up. But I don't know. It just shows like Crosby would go out of his way to make sure his guys were taken care of, and I thought that was great. And the other thing I thought was great was Rosie shows back up after spending some time with the Ruskies. He's back. And him and Crosby are going to have a baby together, I believe, is what we discovered in this scene. Right, Tom?
I don't think so. I think Crosby finds out that he's going to be a father, which I was confused at first when he said he was going to be a father. I'm like, did he get that one lady, British lady, pregnant? But I guess he just went home for a month or something.
So this is... so he got 30 days R&R because they were like, Crosby... we need to wean you off the methamphetamines, go home. That's not what they did. He needed a break, so they sent him home. Because everyone else was like rotated, like the pilots and the guys that were flying would be rotated back. Since he wasn't flying missions, like he didn't hit a limit to get, although he did eventually. Anyways, what I thought was interesting, and this is a diatribe, but Tom, there is an old movie from, I believe, the 60s that's called The Longest Day. It's one of these World War II movies. It's got John Wayne in it. It's got every actor in the world in it that was in the 60s, like popular. It's like a 3-hour movie. There is a scene in the beginning, and I tried to watch this with my kids. My kids very quickly pop smoke and were like, this is boring, Dad. This is in black and white. What are you doing? There is a scene in the beginning where two Brits are talking, and he goes, I just got a letter. My wife's having a baby. I'm really excited. And the guy's like, oh, congratulations. You're going to be a father. And the other soldier goes, oh, no, it's not my baby. And then they just like move on in conversation. And so there was something that was happening during this time where it was like people were gone for a long time. And once again, I'm a staunch proponent of vows and marriage. But when you brought that up about Crosby being like, I guess I'm going to be a dad, but I haven't been home in 2 years, I thought that was that's where my mind went. So The Longest Day with John Wayne. That's funny. Have a good time. Having also a good time is the ethics of war debate, which I think every show and movie has to do in that last 10 minutes in order to figure out whether or not like the people can come to grips with like the devastation that they've wrought all for how it's going to turn out. And so I thought this was an interesting, once again, I want more Rosie and Crosby is essentially, and I thought these guys did a great job.
And you had mentioned earlier, Crosby kind of talking about like not becoming the monster that they were fighting. So I appreciate the conversation, allow our characters to kind of slow down a little bit and hash this out. And I'm with you. Like Crosby and Rosie, I thought were some of the best characters in the show. I thought the actors did a fantastic job. Their dynamics were really good. I would have liked to spend more time with them.
Right.
Also with the Bucks.
Right. Yeah, that don't become the monster that you're fighting, that line, he's like, Friedrich Nietzsche. As soon as someone's like about to quote Friedrich Nietzsche, I'm like, oh, I was probably on my phone at the time playing Wordle. Is Wordle still a thing, Tom? Do you still play Wordle?
Yeah, I think I played today.
Man. Good for you, keeping the tradition alive. Anyways, as soon as he's like, I'm going to quote Nietzsche, I was like, oh, I'm all... Not because I agree with Nietzsche, but Nietzsche's got some great quotes. Anyways, I thought this was like, it's like once you stare into the abyss stares back. I was like, ooh, I'm going to use that next time I'm coaching my kid's soccer team. And you're like, probably not. And that's why they don't let me coach, but doesn't matter. To your point about those actors, to your point about my point about those actors, Harry Crosby, the guy that plays Harry Crosby, is in an Apple show called Manhunt, which is about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln and the manhunt that ensues for John Wilkes Booth.
He plays Booth, right?
He plays Booth, and I've seen the only reason I want to watch that show, other than the fact that I love history, and reading history books turns you into a certain type of person, which we talked about. I want to watch that show because that actor's in it, and also because in 6th grade I played Dr. Mudd and Abraham Lincoln and like 4 other characters. I was a little bit too much in 6th grade, if I'm being honest. But the teachers loved me. The lunch lady was my best friend. But anyways, let's pull back. This isn't therapy, Julian. Let's go back. Speaking of back, guess who's back? Cleven's back.
Back again.
We did it. Tom, this might be our last podcast. Cleven's back, which was great. Like, and I'm sure like these guys, I don't know. Interesting dynamic here, because like Clevens would have known Crosby. I think he briefly met Rosie, but it's also like, hey, this guy that was like the hero of the unit is now back. And so it's probably a lot of like introduction of, hey, this is Clevens, the guy we all told stories about. I don't know. I thought it was interesting that they had him like come back, and Austin Butler's, I'm starting to see the hype a little bit.
He's great. Like he acts great in this sequence. It hits, I think, so much harder just because of the way the show was portrayed, of seeing these 3 guys. Like, who knows if when this actually happened, if they had such a amazing, reunion. But it just plays so well here. And like even when they start flying on these humanitarian runs and dropping off supplies, you see like Rosie and Buck like fly together. Buck taking the left seat, them kind of jabbing at each other. It's all incredible and fantastic. And I think it's like a cool way to kind of put a pin on or a button on the end of this show here, of showing that, hey, they're still flying, they're still doing humanitarian runs to try to help people. Is cool.
Yeah, this operation was called like Chow Hound. It had 2 names. It was called like Manna, which is a biblical reference to manna from heaven. And then the other is Chow Hound, which I believe the Americans chose. And so when I watched this and I saw these guys in the same plane together, I was like, this didn't happen. And I frantically like Googled and read it. And then I came to the conclusion, like, I don't really care. Like, this probably didn't happen, but like, I know Rosie and Crosby were friends in real life. I know that Crosby talks about Clevens and Egan and how they were like the spiritual, like an historic, not spiritual, but they were like the heroes of the unit. And so like, I know they all existed. Did they get on a plane together in order to deliver? Like, this was almost the show being like, hey, I know we dropped a lot of bombs on a lot of people, but guess what we also did? Food. And so like, I'm sure this did something as like people transitioning from like violence to humanitarian aid, and then like the next day they were at home like becoming teachers and professors and like trying to live the rest of their lives, because these guys would have been in their 20s. Like the insanity of that. I appreciate how the show did show us like, hey, we did some good, because there were people that were just starving, because as the Germans like retreated, they would have just burned and took everything. So that would have left a lot of civilian populaces. I loved the tulip field that said like, thank you, Yanks. I thought that was a really cool visual. And then
I do appreciate that we do get that engineer who we've seen throughout the whole series, just like fixing up the planes and everything. He pops on one of those humanitarian runs and he says he's never flown in a plane. That was great.
Right. He took a ship over. He's never flown in a plane before. And I mean, that's just, it's just incredible. And I don't know, that character's real. But I don't know. I mean, it doesn't matter. They do a great job of like wrapping it all up. But when that anti-aircraft smokes the plane and all our main characters die in the last episode, super depressing. Super depressing.
It was a beautiful ending. What you mentioned, like all these planes flying uncontested home, and you just see them all in the sky. And I think there's even like a shot where you see like the wreckage of a plane on the ground, like on a farm or something, while you see all these planes just flying home in pure safety. It was a brilliant end to the show.
Sure. And I appreciated that, like, unlike like in Band of Brothers, Band of Brothers maybe had a less clean ending, where they're like, hey, even though the war's over, like this was happening, like guys were getting drunk and getting injured. Shifty gets in a car accident and ends up going home like last, like all those things. This one, it's just like very clean. They're like, hey, we all get in our own planes and we flew home. It would have been funny had they been like, and we got lost a couple of times on the way, but they didn't.
Crosby got sick.
Yeah, Crosby got air sick. He was sick the whole time.
Now, do you get to keep if you were a pilot and survived the whole time, do you get to keep your plane?
No.
No?
No,
Okay.
there were just graveyards of plane afterwards, where I'm sure some people got government contracts to disassemble them, and then that aluminum became, I don't know, probably Gillette razor blades. The Gillette razor blade that has 17 blades and the lotion squirter, that one, mostly B-17 bombers in it.
Good to know.
I think it's called the Mach 17. That's why.
Okay.
That's where the Mach comes
17.
from. Yeah.
17 blades.
17 blades, Mach speed with lotion. So the Mach 17 plus L, and then it's got the LED reading light, so that if you need to read while shaving, and also the black light in case you need to find scorpions. Because, anyways, Tom had a rattlesnake on his back porch recently, which is this is probably not the right time to bring it up, but I talked about scorpions. So Tom's a rattlesnake survivor.
Moved into a new house, been here for less than a month, already got a rattlesnake on our back porch.
Ooh.
Such fun.
And that rattlesnake's burning in hell right now, right, Tom?
Yeah, he tasted delicious. I made a rattle for my kid.
No, Tom very kindly rehoused that rattlesnake.
Yes.
Whereas
We called the Snake Guru. Look him up, guys. If you live in the local Phoenix area,
Oh,
Snake
no.
Guru. He's the guy.
the guy didn't even pay for advertising. Yeah, he's good though. We would have Homer Simpsoned it at my house, where we would have karate chopped it. But anyways, Tom, let's bring this to a close. We're about in an hour. 9 episodes. We watched them all, sometimes multiple times. We watched recaps. Did you end this show feeling like satisfied? Did you end it being like, okay, I want to like start from the beginning and watch it again? Like, let's talk through it. And once again, our critiques are not of the greatest generation or the guys that ruined the Nazis.
Of course not.
All
Yeah.
4 dudes that ruined the Nazis. Dudes and dudettes that ruined the Nazis. But from a show perspective, how'd you feel?
Yeah, like I kind of said in the beginning, I thought the storytelling is more impactful for me in Band of Brothers when you can take like a specific character, dive into their story, have it be a little bit more linear in terms of the time frame. I felt I was lost throughout the entire series as to where we were in the war, which kind of took me out of it a little bit. I didn't know like what was going on. Like D-Day was one of the things. Like, oh, okay, this is D-Day. This is where we're at. Like otherwise, I didn't really know where the guys were going, what their kind of main missions were outside of just, hey, we're taking a ball bearing plant. Hey, we're taking the subs out or whatever. So I felt they could have done a better job of keeping the audience in the loop of where we were in the war. But I feel like this is a show that I appreciated. I liked. I think it's better than 99% of the stuff that gets released out there. Like we mentioned, it's something that needs to be done to this level. So we don't forget about the heroism that these troops went through. But I don't know if this is a show that I will be rewatching over and over again. Whereas Band of Brothers is one I'll probably watch every other year, like during one of the like Veterans Day or Memorial Day weekends kind of binges. But this show didn't really grab me quite as much. How about yourself?
Sure. So here's what I'm going to say. I was so excited for this. I'd read the book. I love the other series these guys have done. I mean, and I include like Saving Private Ryan in there. While the stories are like terrible and brutal, I think they're important, and these guys do such a good job. And like, I think Spielberg and Hanks come from a place of like trying to honor like these stories, and they have a lot of respect for them. Whereas sometimes like you can like come at it from like a cynical point of view. I don't think they come from it from that point of view. It lacked like the character development that I love from the Pacific and from Band of Brothers, but I'm extending some grace in the sense that I've only essentially watched it once. So I'm going to watch it again. I'm going to have to like literally put it on my calendar a month or two to like just watch it again. And like, as I realize who's who in the show, like, does that change my perspective of how much I enjoyed it? There are things in this show that I found baffling from a storytelling point of view in terms of like, why did we spend time on those characters? Like, why did we just introduce people in the finale? Why did we introduce them in the penultimate? So like, from a storytelling perspective, I have issues. But overall, like, and then there's something about like, you can forgive like bad CGI shots if the rest of the show is like humming, but it does feel like if there's like some confusion and the rest of the show's not working, you start to kind of nitpick. Like my wife was like, hey, do you think they like showed the South or the North Africa mission just so they could use that same shot over and over again of like Austin Butler shirtless and them all standing, and like the green screen is so evident because it looks like a painting behind them. And so part of me is like, okay, they're not going to fly real B-17s and blow them up. This isn't a Michael Bay film. But like I could forgive some of the visual stuff and some of the effects stuff if like the story stuff and the character stuff was driven enough that it made sense. So I'm kind of like middle, though. I'm like middle of the road.
Okay. I thought like the air battles, even though maybe there were some sequences where it kind of took you out of it a bit, but I thought though they did those very well. To your point, like to some of those maybe like scenery kind of shots maybe took you out a bit, specifically that North Africa thing. But I thought for the most part, the aerial battles were done well.
Right. No, I agree. And it was only when I was like, whose plane am I in right now? Like, wired, like, I don't know who's talking. I don't know what's happening. And then I'm like, why does the sky look like a painting? Like, it looks like someone was like, hey, I'm going to show you a beautiful artistry of all these guys like dying in the sky. And you're like, I don't know that, like, I wanted like, I don't know. You want to like smell the oil, like the burning, like that's maybe the wrong expression. I don't want to smell the burning, but it felt like they were like, hey, here's a beautiful canvas where terrible things were happening. And it's just like, no, show me the terrible things that are happening in the sacrifice, as opposed to like, I don't want to give you an Emmy for backdrop paintings. I don't know.
I hear you.
I've gone off on a diatribe. Ultimately, I enjoyed the show. I wish it was a little bit better just from a story perspective in terms of if I hadn't read the book, I think I would have been confused as hell, to be honest. Like, and, you know, you didn't read the book, and so I don't
I
envy
definitely
you.
was in the beginning. Like, yeah, there was a lot of characters. They all looked very similar with their little pencil mustaches and everything else. Like, it was a little bit challenging to follow. I do appreciate, though, that I had no idea that they were going to do this, but once they release the all 9 episodes here, we also get like a mini documentary, The Bloody 100th, which is narrated by Spielberg and Hanks, giving actual footage of the like Crosby and Rosie. Like, I admittedly haven't watched the whole thing yet, but watched like little snippets. And looks absolutely fascinating, and I think is just a perfect little kind of extra little piece to add to the series.
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't watched it either, but I guarantee I'm going to watch it and like it better a little bit. So I don't want to dog on the show. I did enjoy it. I'm glad it came out every Friday, and I was looking forward to it each time. There are some things that it almost felt like they needed a single guiding hand. And I think it comes from, if I'm being honest, the material they took it from. Because once again, Masters of the Air is like a big picture book, whereas Band of Brothers, which is a Stephen Ambrose, is very much driven by like the interviews they did for those survivors and those character stories. And so like they could take one character at a time and go from like training to D-Day jump to end of war, and it made sense like in a timeline. This one was like we took a history book and we tried to make it about the people in the history book, and that takes a really deft hand to do. And I don't think they landed the plane quite all the way through, but I still enjoyed it, and I look forward to watching it a couple more times. And honestly, if after like the 5th rewatch it hits hard, I'm going to hop on here solo. I'm not going to tell Tom, and I'm just be like, I was totally wrong about Masters of the Air. It's the greatest TV series other than season 2 of Justified. Something like that.
I'll look forward to it.
Well, you won't be able to listen to it. I'll put something in it where like it doesn't hit your player. Everyone, the millions of other listeners that we have, they will listen to it. But you, Tom, not on that one.
It's probably for the best.
Anyways, Tom, have we hit it all? Anything else to add?
I think we've hit it all, man. Great show. Don't forget the heroes and thank your veteran and watch The Bloody 100th. I'm sure it's a fantastic documentary.
I agree. Tom, is there any media outside of this show that you have been watching recently that you would like to recommend to our audience? I would like to bring up that we do this at the end of every episode. We've never not done this at the end of an episode. But Tom, do you have a show that you'd like to recommend?
I'm sure I do. You'll have to give me a minute. What are you thinking?
The Gentleman on Netflix. So this is a Guy Ritchie series. Always been a big fan of Guy Ritchie. When he asked me if he should marry Madonna, I said yes. That's when I became his first big fan. And The Gentleman, I think it's like 6 episodes. It's everything you want from like a dirty British crime comedy. It's all of his tricks, the Guy Ritchie tricks, and it's just very fun. And so I've become a huge Theo James fan, and I'm quoting my wife. She shouted that at me the other day, which hurt my feelings, but that's not, once again, this isn't therapy. But The Gentleman.
Have you finished the whole show?
Yeah, I've watched it all.
Okay.
We've watched it all. Then she watched it again a couple of times alone. She was like, you go do something else. She's like, go paint your World War II plane models. And I was like, yes, ma'am. And then I went to the basement, and then she watched season 2 of White Lotus a bunch of times, which Theo James is in. And then she went back to The Gentleman, and then back to White Lotus. And but my painting my figurines has gone well.
Nice. So I'm assuming you should watch the Divergent series as well. That's the only thing I know that guy from. But I think we had talked about this. I haven't finished the series, but I watched a handful of episodes, and it's been a pretty wild and fun ride. I would recommend it as well.
Man.
But thank you for that one. I would recommend. This was a show we talked about potentially doing for the podcast because we had done a handful of murder mysteries and usually have a fun time chatting through those. But I watched Death and Other Details on Hulu. It's got Anthony Patinkin, and I'm sorry I'm blanking on the main actress's name, but she's incredible in it. It's a fun whodunit. I think it was a little bit kind of cute where they kind of try to tie like every character to the main plot and storyline and throw a lot of red herrings and stuff on there. But it was shot really well. It was still a fun ride. Not my favorite conclusion of a murder mystery.
No.
But
you
I
like
don't
when
wanna
more
say,
people die. You've always been on record. You like when there's more murder victims.
There's a good amount of murders in this one, so that was not what disappointed. But
is it
again,
revealed
it was still
that Patinkin is left-handed or right-handed, or
I didn't know the handing of this gentleman. So, but it was a fun ride. It was fun enough. Mystery. I thought it was going to be a little bit more. Like you watch it again, you can kind of read between the lines, but I don't know if the show did that. But again, fun enough show. I would give it a watch if you got nothing else on your queue.
Wonderful. All right. Well, you can reach out to us at teambingepodcast@gmail.com. The weirdest request we've ever gotten is someone asking us to help with a wedding speech. So if you can top that, by all means, reach out to us. That's not weird. It was very nice. It was a friendly email. It was just surprising to us because Tom and I have obviously been very much against the institution of marriage for years as two people who have combined been married for 70 years. Tom, what did I miss?
Yeah, follow us on the socials at Team Binge or Team Binge Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. Let us know. I mean, obviously, we're just finishing up and wrapping up this show. We did True Detective before this series, or kind of simultaneously. But if there's anything else that's coming out here soon that you think would be fun for us to chat through, definitely reach out and let us know.
For Team Binge, I have been Julian.
And I will always be your Tom. Goodbye, everybody.